Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In the Gaza Strip, at least 8 Palestinians were killed in an Israeli strike earlier today as they lined up for bread. The attack struck the front of a UN-operated school being used to shelter thousands of displaced people in the Jabalia refugee camp. The massacre followed the killing of 11 Palestinians Sunday in an Israeli attack on the Safad school in Gaza City. Rescue workers say a woman and a girl were among those killed.
The occupation forces have struck the western wing of the school, resulting in numerous deaths and injuries among the displaced civilians sheltering there. We are witnessing a true massacre and extremely harrowing scenes. Civil defense and medical teams are working to recover bodies and save as many lives as possible. But the situation is deeply tragic, and the reality we face here is extremely difficult.
United Nations and Palestinian health authorities have administered tens of thousands of doses of the polio vaccine to Palestinian children across the Gaza Strip. The mass vaccination campaign began Sunday after Israel agreed to limited pauses in its attacks to allow the campaign to go ahead. This is UN spokesperson Louise Wateridge.
We had the first rain yesterday afternoon. It was a pretty torrential downpour for the best part of an hour. And it's just a huge warning for what winter will bring. The sewage water was flooding the streets. Everybody here sleeping on the floor. You know, the shelters aren't waterproof.
In the occupied West Bank, Israeli forces have returned the body of a Palestinian man who died less than 2 hours after the Israeli military arrested him. Family members and medical workers say there are clear signs that 58-year-old Ayman Abed was tortured and badly beaten in Israeli custody after he was detained Monday in the village of Kafr Dan. Meanwhile, residents of Jenin are reporting shortages of food, water, power, and medicine as Israeli troops lay siege to the city and its refugee camp. Earlier today, the Israeli army also raided the West Bank city of Tulkarem, killing a 14-year-old Palestinian boy. In more news from the West Bank, Israeli soldiers fired live rounds at Palestinian journalists documenting Israel's days-long deadly raid on Jenin. Israeli soldiers were also seen chasing and attempting to ram the group of journalists with an armored military bulldozer as the Israeli army destroyed shops, streets, homes, and other infrastructure. At least 2 journalists were injured in the attack. Meanwhile, in Gaza, the 19-year-old beloved TikTok star Mohammed Medou Halimi was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Khan Yunis Friday. He'd walked to his local internet cafe, a tent with Wi-Fi, to meet a friend and collaborator when he was struck and began bleeding from the head. Halimi died in a hospital a few hours later. He began uploading videos to TikTok and Instagram in May, documenting life in Gaza and Israel's relentless war. In Israel, hundreds of thousands of protesters flooded the streets of Tel Aviv and other major cities Sunday after the Israeli army announced it recovered the bodies of 6 Israeli hostages held by Hamas in Gaza. Israel says the hostages were shot by Hamas. Hamas says they were killed by Israeli airstrikes. The discovery of their deaths prompted Israel's labor federation, Histadrut, to call a general strike to demand a ceasefire agreement that would secure the remaining hostages held by Hamas. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu remained defiant despite the protests. On Monday, he insisted he will not agree to any deal unless Israel maintains control of the Philadelphia corridor along Gaza's border with Egypt.
The axis of evil needs the Philadelphia corridor, and for that reason, we must control the Philadelphia corridor. Hamas insists for that reason that we not be there, and for that reason, I insist that we be there.
After headlines, we'll go to Israel for the latest. The United Kingdom has suspended some arms exports to Israel, citing a risk that they might be used to commit serious violations of international humanitarian law. On Monday, Foreign Secretary David Lammy told the Parliament the partial arms ban would not cut off the flow of most weapons from the UK to Israel, including parts for F-35 fighter jets.
This is not an arms embargo. It targets around 30, approximately 350 licenses to Israel in total for items which could be used in the current conflict in Gaza. The rest will continue.
In a statement, the British group Global Justice Now said, quote, under huge pressure, the government is waking up to the fact that it must stop arming Israel. But this is a half-baked ban which risks maintaining UK complicity in war crimes. You wouldn't deal with the dangerous arsonists by halving their petrol supply, they said. In Iraq, the U.S. military says 7 of its soldiers were injured last week in a joint raid with Iraqi forces that the Pentagon says killed 15 fighters with the Islamic State group. Iraqi officials say Thursday's raid destroyed 4 hideouts used by ISIS, along with weapons and ammunition. Meanwhile, the New Yorker magazine has published images of the U.S. Marines' 2005 massacre of Iraqi civilians in the town of Haditha. The graphic images show many of the victims were shot in the head at close range. Release of the photos comes 19 years after the massacre, and only after producers of the investigative podcast In the Dark sued the Navy, the Marine Corps, and U.S. Central Command to force them to turn over the photos and other records. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with Madeleine Barron, lead reporter for In the Dark, who traveled to Haditha to meet with family members of the victims of the killing, many women and children. In Ukraine, at least 47 people were injured on Sunday when a Russian missile struck a shopping mall and sports center in the northeastern city of Kharkiv. 7 children were wounded. That attack came just 2 days after another Russian strike on Kharkiv hit a residential building and a playground, killing 7 people and injuring 77 others. A 14-year-old girl was among the dead. Russian cruise missile attacks prompted air raid alerts in Kyiv and other major cities overnight, following a similar barrage on Monday. Meanwhile, students in the Russian city of Belgorod, near the border with Ukraine, opened the new school year Monday with online classes after a Ukrainian attack destroyed a child care center. Belgorod's governor said a separate weekend attack by Ukraine killed 5 people and wounded 46 others, including children. Ukraine is continuing its incursion into Russia's Kursk region, even as Russia's military continues to gain territory in Ukraine's east. The Biden administration seized a plane belonging to the Venezuelan president, Nicolas Maduro, claiming the purchase of the aircraft violated U.S. sanctions. The plane, which was seized in the Dominican Republic, was allegedly bought for $13 million through a shell company, then smuggled out of the United States, according to the U.S. Justice Department. Maduro's government condemned the move as an act of piracy. This comes as tensions remain high following July's contested presidential election in Venezuela. Venezuelan authorities have issued an arrest warrant for Edmundo Gonzalez, the opposition presidential candidate the U.S. and allies have recognized as the winner of the election. This is Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro.
Este señor cobarde, González Urrutia, se da el tupé de decir que no.
This cowardly man, González Urrutia, has the nerve to say that he doesn't recognize any of our institutions. That is why the majority of the people who live in Venezuela agree that laws should work, that there must be order. The Constitution should be respected, and public government institutions should do their work.
And more than 10,000 hotel workers across 25 hotels in 9 U.S. cities walked out on strike over the Labor Day holiday weekend, demanding higher wages and better staffing levels. These strikes come after months of fruitless contract talks between Unite Here and hotel chains, including Hilton, Hyatt, and Marriott. Union President Gwen Mills said in a statement, quote, "We won't accept a new normal where hotel companies profit by cutting their offerings to guests and abandoning their commitments to workers," she said. Later in the broadcast, we'll speak with a striker in California and the local union president in San Francisco. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined by Juan Gonzalez in Chicago. Hi, Juan.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to all of our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.